Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Nicholas, and we're going to be talking about a topic that I think is really timely and relevant for a lot of us. It's energy cleansing with crystals. For those of you who aren't familiar with my work, I have been a lifelong crystal lover and rock hound, everything from the mineralogical to the metaphysical. I have the opportunity to work in earth science as my day job, as well as write books and lead workshops and offer one-on-one sessions related to crystal healing. So today's topic is we'll say sampled from my newest work, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. And I think these are some really foundational practices that can help us out in so many different ways. So our goals in this class are going to be talking about just a few basic concepts. We're going to talk about the importance of spiritual hygiene, why we cleanse, how we cleanse, why it's important to do it regularly. We're also going to talk about the best methods for cleansing our crystals themselves. We're going to take a tour of some of my favorite families of stones that support energy cleansing for ourselves, our environment, and beyond. And then we'll get a chance to have an overview of some techniques, actually putting these ideas into practice. So with that in mind, let's just go right into the basics. It's helpful to bear in mind that we're going to be using measurable energies as a model for the energies we can't see or detect, what we call the so-called subtle energies or spiritual energies. And to really understand them, I think it is good to just know what energy is from a real basic level. And the scientific definition of energy is deliciously vague. Energy is defined as the capacity to do work. It is usually something that we can measure. Usually it can be transferred from one system to another. We have lots of examples of energies that we're probably really familiar with: heat and light and magnetism and sound and so much more. Energy itself is inherently neither good nor bad. It can be helpful or harmful in different contexts. Electricity is necessary for us to have this lecture, to stream this broadcast to you from wherever you're listening, whenever you're listening to it. But if we stick a finger in an outlet, that electricity is harmful. So it's not the energy itself that is good or bad, but its timing, its place, its delivery. And even though we look around us and might see a world that appears to be fairly inert and unmoving, everything that we can experience, physical or not, is basically energy at one level or another. From the tiniest waves to the largest systems that are out in the world, we can break things down into the relationships of particles and waves and the energies that drive them. This is because all matter vibrates. If we take a look at a single atom, we're going to be able to break it down into these little subatomic particles. And if we continue to divide those further and further, we see, one, they are in motion, and two, the smaller the components are that we look at, the less they behave like matter, the less they move in predictable and regular oscillations, and the more they experience themselves as waveforms, as energy. So when we talk about energies, there are a few key terms that are really helpful to understand. In the spiritual world, we talk about frequency quite a lot. And frequency is, the number of cycles in our unit of measurement. Hertz is a really good example. We measure lots of things with that scale, and that's just the number of cycles per second. So if you see a little graph of energy, it looks like a kind of sideways S-curve called a sine wave. The number of those little squiggles in that sine wave per second is 1 hertz, 2 hertz, so on and so forth. So frequency is kind of akin to the station on the radio. In fact, those numbers on your radio dial, if we go back to the ancient and mystical years and we had analog dials on real stereos, that is corresponding to the number of megahertz, number of thousands of cycles per second that we're kind of tuning into. But there is another really important component. That's amplitude. So amplitude is almost like a measurement of the volume of the energy. When we talk about Frequency, it's finding the specific station, the specific kind or flavor of energy that we're attuning to, or broadcasting, or receiving, or whatever the circumstance might be. Amplitude, on the other hand, is how loud or how softly that energy is being received. So, this is really important to note because the relationship of energy fields that meet is not contingent solely upon frequency. Amplitude plays a really big part in what happens when energy fields communicate, when they interact, when they entrain or align. And the most important thing to remember is that the louder energy or the higher amplitude field is always more likely to bring the quieter or the lower amplitude field into harmony with it. And we've all experienced this in everyday life, especially talking about regulating our own energy fields. We walk into a crowded space and people are just full of joy. Something great is happening in that room and it's contagious, and you feel that same uprising of happiness and joy welling up within you. That's because the amplitude, the collective volume of that field is much louder than yours. So you're kind of brought into harmony with it. On the other hand, we can walk into a room where something pretty unpleasant has taken place, and all of a sudden we feel that it's the air is heavy, oppressive. Our energy feels like it drops. Our consciousness sinks, and that's all down to the loudness of that signal relative to the loudness of yours. So, as we start thinking about everything around us being energy, communicating via energy, broadcasting energy, we want to do more than just focus on the specific station we're dialing into. We also want to make sure that when necessary, we know how to crank up the volume to boost the strength of our signal so it can't be drowned out or overcome or attuned to things that we'd rather not be in alignment with. Now, because we live in this sea of energies all around us, it's important to note that not every source of energy is beneficial. A lot of them, in fact, the majority, are probably going to be fairly neutral. But there are lots that can also knock us off kilter. And these are things that we might refer to as sources of psychic harm. And I say it this way because it's not that they are bad things or evil things necessarily. They're just potential areas where we can experience intrusive energy, disruptive energy, harmful energy. Again, if we remove the kind of moral, philosophical nature of good versus evil, we're just thinking, is this supporting me? Is this in alignment with where I want to be? Or is it not? And the number one thing that is the most important source of psychic harm that we have to address, the number one thing that if we learn how to cleanse and regulate will have the biggest impact on our well-being, is our own thoughts and emotions. How often do we have that tape playing in our heads of not being good enough or successful enough or fast enough or thin enough or rich enough or whatever it might be? We bump into something and we have some colorful language in our head, or we miss a deadline or whatever it might be. And these are the kinds of things that we can also broadcast into the space around us. So those thoughts and emotions can also influence the people in our vicinity. Likewise, their energies can influence ours. And oftentimes this is really just kind of happenstance. It's the same as the internal, just kind of overflowing a bit. But every now and then we run across, we'll say, some more pointed sources of psychic harm that come from other people's emotions, things like judgment and jealousy, envy, hatred, all those kind of malicious things. We might also occasionally experience something like unintentional psychic attack, where someone's kind of, we'll say, base orientation to the world is more receptive than projective, and they siphon off energies wherever they go. That's not inherently a bad thing, especially if we don't know how to control that, though. We have a tendency to siphon off whatever is the biggest, sparkliest, shiniest source of energy around us. We also have formal psychic attack, where people do know what they're doing and they are intentionally trying to cause harm or say, draw off a surplus of energy. In many cultures, they recognize a phenomenon called the evil eye, where through the kind of power of the eyes, we concentrate something like jealousy or envy. And this can be done unconsciously with just a look of unhappiness. It could also, in some cultures, be thrown very intentionally. We can talk about things like etheric cords and psychic vampirism, these kind of energetic relationships that we have between situations and places and people and objects that can also draw off our kind of vital forces. Some of us will be sensitive to things like geopathic stress, which is when earth energies are either naturally disruptive to our own well-being because the earth has to regulate itself as a much bigger organism than we are, or it can be earth energies that are disrupted usually by human activity. Buildings and power lines and roads and all kinds of things can kind of interrupt the natural course of energies crisscrossing the planet. And on rarer occasions, these last 4 bullet points can show up. So, maybe we have, we'll say, some unfulfilled business with our team in spirit. That can be a source of psychic harm, not because they're necessarily out to get us, but because we've got some karmic activities we got to follow up on. We do very rarely encounter some, we'll say, less than helpful spiritual beings that are out in the ethers. In most of human history, we also see evidence of things like ritual curse and magical attack, albeit this is pretty rare in today's world. It still exists and it's still out there. And then we can also inherit patterns of psychic harm, or experience it through multiple lifetimes. If we believe in reincarnation and the transmigration of the soul, there can be lessons still playing out from previous experiences, previous iterations of us in other bodies, other times, other places, that are still kind of sending ripples through the universe in the here and now. So taking all of that into account, the number one thing that we can do to, we'll say, have the one up over these sources of psychic harm is what I call good spiritual hygiene. And this is just learning how to cleanse and clear what doesn't belong to us, what isn't helpful to us, what we didn't ask for in some cases. And when these sources of psychic harm accrue, the effects of them can be really tangible. So, on the screen before us, you're going to see a couple diagrams of a human aura, kind of stylized representation of our energy field. On the left, you're going to see a nice, shiny, healthy aura. On the right, we've got one that is, we'll say, decidedly less balanced. We can see dark spots and holes and leaks and tears and cords kind of coming off of it. And these are the kinds of things that we might experience if we are exposed to sources of psychic harm that go unmitigated for, various lengths of time, depending on the degree of intensity. Our own thoughts and emotions, that might take quite a long time to accrue these kinds of harmful effects in our energy bodies, but maybe we experience some really intense energies out in the world, and that could bring a whole lot of other things up that can happen pretty darn quickly. So bearing all of that in mind, we know what can cause harm, but how about what can help out? And one of my favorite categories of tools to turn to are crystals. Crystals are excellent for remediating sources of psychic harm, for practicing spiritual hygiene, for protecting us, because they bring a lot of value in so many different ways. They are made out of really organized little units of matter, what we call a crystal lattice. And because the kind of structural integrity of crystals is extraordinarily high, it produces really coherent and high amplitude, or in other words, loud energy fields. So this orderly structure is a great representation of the orderly energy they bring to us. And because they're way more coherent and organized than we're ever going to be, they're going to have the kind of loudness that we lack, which draws us into alignment with them. The kind of general nature of crystal energy is to stabilize and harmonize, what we call cohere, amplify and regulate the energies in their surroundings. That means it's also going to regulate our own energies in that process. By embodying this perfection, integrity, order on a very physical, very structural and material level, they also help to bring the same qualities to us on a less perceptible level. Maybe that's bringing more organization to our electromagnetic field, our aura, our body of light, but maybe it's also bringing that level of organization to our spirit, our light, our mind. And when we become more self-organized in that way, we also become less susceptible to outside influences. Crystals are also really symbolically protective, and we find this all throughout the ages, from the very beginning of humans walking the earth, Rocks endure. They can withstand the erosive nature of time itself much better than our soft and brittle bodies. They live much longer lifespans than we ever will. And so these kinds of symbolic qualities of stone also confer a sense of resilience, protection, endurance to us on an energetic and spiritual level. And then before we kind of start to tour the different crystals that are some of my favorites for cleansing our energy, let's talk about ways that we can care about our stones at a really high level. If we want them to be able to take care of us, we also need to know how to take care of them. So that means we cleanse our crystals regularly. Again, cleansing is not because they necessarily pick up on bad energies. If we remove that kind of philosophical idea of good versus bad, it's just, is the energy this crystal is carrying in alignment with our goals today, or is it not? Much like when we are making lunch, if we're making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and we get peanut butter on our hands, it is not evil peanut butter, but it's really disruptive if we, go to turn off the light switch or open the refrigerator. It gets everywhere and it makes a mess. So cleansing is about just removing the things that aren't helpful to us in the grand scheme. There are so many different ways that we can cleanse our crystals. There is a little bit of homework that we have to do, however, and that is to ensure that the methods we use for cleansing will not physically damage the crystals that we're working with. So lots of different ways to cleanse could include things like sunlight and moonlight, salt, water, clay, smoke, sound, breath. We've got lots of options. It is important to note, however, some things can be damaged by water, some by salt, some can fade in sun. So there are some methods that are pretty universally safe. Those are things like smoke, burning your favorite cleansing herb or incense, sound. It could be the clapping of your hands, the striking of singing bowls, drumming, use your voice, whatever you like. Sacred sound is a really universal way for regulating energy, for cleansing and moving energy all around the world. And also the breath can be a really powerful way to do this. So I cover a lot of these, we'll say, practices in greater depth. In a lot of my books, you can find really great instructions for doing this online as well. So now that we know why philosophically we should cleanse, and we understand some ways that we can take care of our crystals so they can better take care of us, let's examine some groupings of stones that help us cleanse our energies in one way or another. And so I have these kind of broken up by similar effects or similar qualities. And we're going to start with a group of minerals that are salts and halides. So when we think of salt, we think of table salt, which is actually this mineral halite that you see on the far left. And it's sodium chloride. A salt, chemically speaking, is defined as a generally neutral substance, kind of neutral pH, that is formed by an acid and a base coming together. And it is the kind of neutralizing of these polar forces that makes salts so effective at cleansing. Now, in the mineral world, some of our more famous salts belong to the halide group, where we have this group of halogen gases that are connected to usually metals. So salt is a really great example of that, but so is fluorite. And salts can also refer to other minerals outside of this grouping that still give us that kind of reaction of acid and base generating a neutral outcome. So selenite is another really good example of a mineral salt that is much beloved for cleansing. So halite is probably the deepest cleaner of all of these. It is, we'll say, a little bit more abrasive energetically, which is great when we're experiencing really stubborn kinds of stuck-on energies that we just want to remove from our space or us. We can find really beautiful and inexpensive specimens of halite, but we can also use table salt, rock salt, sea salt, whatever is on hand and easy. If you've got a Himalayan salt lamp or a slab of Himalayan salt, those are also really great cleansing tools that we can use for cleansing our crystals, for ourselves, our space, just as long as those stones are safe for prolonged exposure to salt. Fluoride is really wonderful for cleansing the human aura because it kind of digs deep and pulls things out. When we see the bands are present in this central image, we sometimes call those rainbow fluorides. And symbolically, it's almost like kind of combing out the different layers of our aura to disentangle what doesn't belong there. And then selenite is the crystalline form of a mineral called gypsum. The one you see on the screen there is what we call satin spar. It's really fibrous. Otherwise, it can form kind of glassy plates and crystals like the one I'm holding up. And this one has such a profound relationship to light that it really floods our energy field with light to help clear out, we'll say, denser or lower vibe energies. Grounding stones are also quintessential to our cleansing practice because grounding is a means of effectively, safely discharging the kinds of energies that don't serve us anymore. A lot of these minerals might be rich in heavy metals like iron and other, nice kind of grounding elements of the periodic table. So hematite, iron oxide, is a classic example of an iron ore that has long been used for grounding and protection. Iron minerals in Chinese medicine are described as having a kind of descending effect or descending quality when it comes to the regulation of our qi or life force. So, just think of it as being able to give us a safe outlet into the earth. If we can discharge into the earth, she has a much larger capacity for transforming and transmuting energies than we do on a personal level. So that's just a great way to hand things over to someone who can handle it better than you. Black tourmaline, another really famous stone for grounding, cleansing, purification, and protection. This is the most iron-rich member of the tourmaline family. We'll talk about another quality of tourmalines in a little bit, but black tourmaline in particular, it's almost like having a kind of cosmic garbage disposal in your energy field. It really transmutes and purifies things that can be a bit more stubborn than a lot of other grounding stones. Aragonite awakens this kind of kinship between our energy field and that of the earth. It's a very dynamic grounding stone that doesn't feel quite as weighty and heavy as others. A lot of folks experience kind of synergy between aragonite and the elemental spirits, or we'll say the spirits of nature all around us, which gives us extra resources for transforming energies that don't help. Magnetite is another iron ore. It's an iron oxide with a different crystal structure than hematite's got. And it really helps to kind of center and orient our field while simultaneously giving us those grounding qualities to draw things out that don't serve us. And then silomelane is the mineral that's produced those kind of feathery dendrites in the rock that you see down there in the bottom left. And this is a manganese ore, often manganese and barium. Barium is very, very heavy, and the denseness of those two stones is great for grounding. Silomelane also has a nice kind of purifying effect overall. It can sometimes reveal to us where disruptive energies are coming from as well, which is phenomenal because then we can kind of go to the source and make some changes. Stones that are associated with light are also great for purification. So of course we could pop selenite on this list, but we've already talked about it, so we'll move on to some others. Quartz is one of those quintessential stones connected to themes of light and illumination. It has some really fun optical properties that embody this in a very literal way, but it kind of draws in light or life force to bring an overall sense of balance. This can be great for discharging what doesn't serve us. Danbrite in that middle top there. Another stone associated with light. It awakens the kind of light of our spiritual body. It has a very centering effect as well. That's great for purification. Diamond, although a rare and precious stone, one of the most valuable ones that's out there, can be found in far less valuable forms, ones that are less perfect than the one you see on the screen. But diamond represents the kind of perfect archetype of divine will. It draws this strength and clarity of purpose from the highest spiritual planes, and disruptive forces just kind of fall away when we connect to that original template for perfection and strength. We've got labradorite down in the bottom left. Labradorite is one of my favorite stones, one that I almost always have on my person. I've got a nice flashy one that I keep here by the computer to also kind of help filter things out. This is a stone that magnifies our light, which can be good for, say, releasing some sludge in the aura, helping with those dense and dark and sticky spots. but it also forms a kind of shield. It's like a selectively permeable membrane that's breathable. It gives us the chance to let go what doesn't serve and receive the good stuff. And then citrine, another wonderful stone of light. Citrine helps to unwind the tension that holds old patterns in place. It is kind of warming and strengthening, invigorating, and helps support all processes of elimination, which means it's perfect for cleansing. Now, stones that have a porous structure are also phenomenal for cleansing. Um, in one way or another, we have some level of sponginess to the stones that you see on the screen. So shungite is a fairly new discovery, primarily mined in Russia, although I'm excited to see that the geological data is showing we've got deposits of shungite in several other parts of the world now. And it's made out of these interesting structures called fullerene molecules, which are things like tubes and spheres of carbon molecules, carbon ions. And they form these really complex geometries. And the kind of porous, spongy nature of those hollow tubes and hollow spheroids is a great, we'll say, template for drawing in, siphoning out the energies that don't serve us. Aquamarine belongs to the beryl family. Beryls are what we call cyclosilicates. So they're made out of little rings of silica with other ions around them. And then these rings all line up and form these kind of hollow tubes at the microscopic level. Tourmaline is also a cyclosilicate and shares this quality with aqua. So cyclosilicates are great for moving energy through the ranks, for clearing and aligning. Aquamarine also shares the kind of symbolic quality of water that helps to wash away stubborn, murky, or we'll say low consciousness energies. Tourmalines as a whole give us those same qualities of cyclosilicates. Some varieties of tourmaline, the kind of gemmier ones, can be rich in lithium and other things that are also really uplifting and soothing. We'll talk more about lithium minerals on a following slide in just a moment. Down at the bottom, we've got a different kind of cyclosilicate. So sometimes, instead of all of those little rings of silica stacking together to form a perfect tube or pipeline, they're kind of randomized, and it creates a spongy texture. And sigillite and even chrysocolla are good examples of cyclosilicates that create this kind of spongiform porous structure. That means they're really great for holding on to and containing energies that we're trying to release. Because sigillite is also rich in lithium, it has this kind of uplifting quality. It penetrates really dense, firm, stubborn energies and draws them out and in so they can be contained and transmuted over time. And then one that I think is sorely underappreciated is clenoptilolite. Sometimes the German name is used, even in English-speaking communities, clenoptilolith with a K. And this is a kind of silicate rock that contains zeolites, which are these hollow kind of framework silicates. And this is used for things like water filtration. Its physical structure is one that is used for cleansing things on a very material level, and energetically it does the same to us. And then some other cleansing stones. These work for other kinds of reasons than the ones that we've described earlier. So amethyst, for example, is symbolically associated with the act of alchemy, of transmuting energy from one state to another. So it's like the kind of archetype of the violet flame, the master alchemist that takes those harmful and disruptive energies and transmutes them to something that is more harmonious and in alignment. So it's not just about sending it away, it's about recycling or upcycling it. Smoky quartz gets its color from tiny little bits of alumina that draw in the whole spectrum of wavelengths of light, which can make it range from a really pale tan or gray to a really deep dark black, like the one I'm holding up here. This is a natural smoky quartz from Colorado. And it is that kind of way the photons come into those color centers that draws light inward, that also helps to draw things out of us that don't serve us. It's also really grounding and stabilizing. Sulfur has been used for cleansing for millennia. It's been associated with kind of liminal spaces and removing, we'll say, harmful or malicious spiritual entities. Beautiful crystals of sulfur are available from fine mineral retailers, but you can find far less pretty versions that are equally effective at scrubbing the environmental energies all around us. And then at the bottom, we've got a couple more. Lepidolite, I mentioned we are going to talk a little bit more about our lithium minerals. So I'm going to choose lepidolite as our representative of that. So this is a member of the mica family. We've got dozens of different species in the mica group, and lepidolites refer to a small number of them that contain high amounts of lithium and rubidium and a few other interesting elements. But there is a kind of buoyancy that lithium minerals gives us. So when life feels heavy or overwhelming, when those harmful energies are weighing us down, they give us a sense of levity. So we're not going to be overwhelmed by that. It also means that we're not going to take them on. Lithium minerals have the ability to help energy circulate so it doesn't become stagnant. This is kind of like putting a fountain in a pond. To prevent eutrophication, to prevent the kind of runoff of nutrients and other things from creating an environment that is green and slimy. So lithium minerals do this in our own energy field, so we don't metaphorically become slimy ponds. So we get this nice, refreshed, dazzling sense of balance that is dynamic rather than static. And then sodalite. Sodalite is really purifying at the mental level. It exerts a kind of stabilizing influence to the mind, bringing a greater sense of order and structure, coherence. By doing that, we can also weed out those internal sources of psychic harm. Sodalite is wonderful for just generally kind of sweeping things out of the aura that don't serve us as well. So all those stones that we've met so far are fantastic for cleansing. I'm sure you'll find pretty easy access to at least a few of them, if not most. And from here, let's talk about ways that we can apply these and other stones to our life for cleansing our energy field. And I'd actually like to start with an exercise that we can perform that requires no tools, because sometimes we're out and about in the world, we need some quick cleansing, and we've forgotten our beloved crystal collection, or we left our beautiful set of Tibetan singing bowls at home, or we just aren't in a space where we can light some sage on fire. So a technique that I really love is called light bathing. So if you'd like to practice this, we can do this briefly together here in this space. We want to select one of these colors that you see on the left. They all have different kinds of, we'll say, cleansing capacities. White light will be the most balancing, the softest. Golden light will be a little bit more invigorating while still being purifying. Silver cools things down when they feel a little too warm. Violet has that kind of transmuting, alchemizing effect like we talked about with amethyst. Ice blue is great when things are maybe moving too quickly on an energetic level and we really need them to slow down and get the sense of inner purity. When we don't know what to pick, rainbow or prismatic light is a great option because it's got a little bit of everything. And when there are really stubborn energies that we really want to pull out of us, imagining light that is almost like the opposite of light, pure blackness, is going to target those areas that are the heaviest and hardest to reach. So what I'll invite everyone watching to do is to pick one of those colors. You get to choose, that's entirely up to you. I'm going to default to a nice kind of prismatic light that has all the colors of the rainbow because it will cover all my bases. Go ahead and close your eyes and just take a couple of normal, relaxing breaths, checking in with your body, your mind, your spirit, taking note of anywhere where you might find some tension, just asking that it be released. And we're going to set our intention to do this shower of light to cleanse our energy field. And imagine that above the crown of your head, at least a foot or more, you see a point of light that matches the color that you've selected. And it grows and grows, almost as if there is a cloud made of that color of light hovering just above you. And as it gets bigger and brighter and fuller, a little bit of that light begins to trickle down like a gentle rain shower. And then more and more pours all around you, enveloping you from head to toe. The cleansing energies of that light flood outwards, reaching all the layers of your subtle or energetic anatomy. We allow that colored light to reach down to our tiniest level. Every particle that we're made out of is bathed in it, as well as in the big picture. Our whole being is wrapped in that light for cleansing. You can imagine almost like a drain beneath you, wherein all the spent light and energy is moving. You might see a kind of muddy runoff, and just let that light continue to flow until at your feet or below you, you see it running nice and clear. Then we will thank the universe for providing this cleansing light to us. And imagine that steady rain shower beginning to slow to a faint drizzle until no more droplets are forming. Imagining that cloud of light dissipating above us and returning to the universe. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. An exercise like this is also something that we can use to cleanse our crystals, our tools, our environments. We can imagine a very localized cloud of light above a stone we're trying to cleanse, or a much larger one if we want to clear the energy of our space. We'll say the more stubborn and stuck kinds of energies can be hard to clear this way in the beginning, but with some practice, with frequency and regularity, you'll be able to transmute a lot of things with very little effort. One of the easiest methods to cleanse your own energy field is to use 2 quartz crystals. You just want 2 pieces of somewhat similar size and shape. So I've got 2 clear-ish quartz crystals here. They could be smoky quartz, clear quartz. They could be natural like I'm holding, or polished like the ones on the screen. That's entirely up to you. But after cleansing our crystals, you're going to place one in your non-dominant hand. You're going to place one pointing towards the wrist, and in your dominant hand, one pointing away from the wrist. And just imagine, as you hold those stones, that they are beginning to infuse you with light. So the one pointing inwards is going to draw purifying energies, vitalizing energies from the universe that will cycle through your body. And the one pointing away from you is going to help you expel the spent energies or the disharmonious and disruptive ones that you've accumulated. And if it's helpful, you can imagine breathing in through the inward pointing one, breathing out through the one that is facing the exterior. And even just as little as 60 seconds of this can give your energy field a quick reset. Not only is this technique very cleansing, it's also energizing. So if we feel a little depleted, a little run down, this is a nice way to recharge our energy and be prepared for whatever is coming next on the schedule. Another popular method for cleansing our energy fields with crystals uses selenite. So we mentioned earlier that selenite has a relationship with light, and like the one you see on the screen there, or the one I'm holding up, this is what we call satin spar. It's made out of compact fibers of gypsum. And these fibers are fiber optic. If we shine a light at one end, it travels all the way through the other. And so in addition to being a mineral salt that is very neutralizing energetically, it has the ability to move things that are stuck. So if we take a piece of selenite, especially a nice fibrous one, we can cleanse it first, spend a moment or so kind of setting our intention, and gently sweep it through the aura. Head to toe is usually a good way to go for most people. And just kind of imagine that it's like lathering yourself up with an energetic cleanser. You're just sweeping away everything that doesn't serve. Just make sure that you cleanse your selenite afterwards. There's this really persistent myth out there on the internet and elsewhere that selenite never needs cleansing or clearing, but the nature of crystals is remembrance. Their crystal structures enable them to retain the imprints of energy fields they come into contact with. And again, it's not a case of Some energies are morally good or bad. So crystals aren't, we'll say, filtering out only bad. They're remembering what they're remembering. So we just wipe the slate clean when we're done. This is a stone that, because of its porosity, is not good to maybe cleanse with water for prolonged periods. It's very soft, so it can be scratched by salt, but you could use sunlight or moonlight or sound or smoke or a variety of other methods that would be absolutely safe for cleansing with selenite. Another technique that I love when we are experiencing maybe heavier or more stubborn energies is aura scrubbing. All you need to do is get yourself a crystal cluster that fits comfortably in the palm of your hand, like the amethyst on screen. I'm using a little bit of a lighter colored one over here. And you're going to cleanse your crystal. And then imagine that as it sits in the palm of your hand, all of those crystal points are like the bristles of a brush or maybe even the nozzle of a shower head, and they're projecting light through the points. And you're just going to kind of sweep through the aura, sweep through the energy field. And start slowly. If you find kind of a rough spot, you might encounter portions of your energy field that feel heavy or stuck or hot or cold, or as if you're just magnetically drawn to one. Those are usually signs of areas that have some of these disruptive or intrusive energies that need to be released, that need to be kind of set free. And so aura scrubbing is a great way to do that. And I find this is a much deeper cleanse than just a simple selenite sweep. And although I've got, amethyst here and on the screen, you could use a cluster of any variety of mineral that you want. You could use anything in the quartz family: clear, smoky amethyst, citrine. You could do calcite or celestite or whatever you've got, just as long as it's stable enough to hold. You don't want to do this with such a fragile stone. You stand to break it. But the general shape of clusters and the way they kind of spray energy through them is what gives us the effect we're looking for. If we can partner that with a stone that is also purifying in one way or another, like those quartzes we talked about, then we're going to get the added bonus of their like intrinsic nature added to their structural nature. And we can also create gemstone elixirs for cleansing our energy. So this is done by soaking a crystal or gemstone in water and then applying that water to our space. Now, the ones that I've chosen on screen are generally safe for exposure to water. I will caution anyone against consuming said water unless we know without a shadow of a doubt that you've got no other trace elements or minerals which can be invisible to the naked eye. You can instead do some indirect methods. I've got some really clear and lucid instructions for doing that in several of my books, including the one most of these exercises come from, Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense. But if we're only using them for external purposes, only using them in our environment or our energy field, you can make direct infusions of all of the crystals that are on the screen here. Smoky quartz, aquamarine, sodalite, shungite, and diamond all have different cleansing properties that can be transferred to water really easily. So pick a stone, add it to your water, leave that in usually a well-lit place for a few hours, and you could add that to the bath. You could put some in a little spray bottle like I've got here and spray it in the aura, or spray it in a room, spray it on an object that needs cleansing. If we're going to do this for long-term storage, you might need to add something like maybe some vodka or brandy to that bottle just to discourage bacterial growth, because dust will settle in there. But gem elixirs are a wonderful way to cleanse. They're a great way to move energy. And if we make them in advance, we've always got them on hand for whenever we need them. And last but not least, maybe what we aim for is a way to keep the energy of our space refreshed and cleared on an ongoing basis. So we can do that by creating crystal grids in and around our home. So I've got an example of one that you can make with just two different kinds of stones. This one comes straight from the book. It's my standard kind of purification and protection grid, and it combines the anchoring, stabilizing, shielding properties of black tourmaline in the corners with the ability of selenite to move and transform energies on the walls between them. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be equidistant. Sometimes you have walls or other barriers in the way. So just anywhere between the 2 points formed in the corners by your tourmaline will do the job. You can also kind of treat this like a recipe that you want to customize. Maybe you've got something you'd like to add or subtract or substitute for one of these stones. As long as its energies match the goals you're aiming for, then you are free to do that. We can create one big grid that envelops our entire home. We can also make smaller ones just around a particular space or room or corner, depending on how our spaces might be divided. So there's so many different ways that we can create these crystal grids. There are a couple of pointers that I want to offer you. Firstly, ensure that you cleanse them regularly. And this can be fairly passive cleansing. If you're doing a smoke cleanse in your whole house, that means you're also cleansing the grids that are in your house, and that's a great thing to do. But every now and then, it's nice to collect those crystals and give them a little bit of a deeper cleanse, give them a little extra attention, just check in with them and ensure that they aren't working too hard or they don't need help, or maybe it's time to up the ante and mix and match your stones to give you some different effects. So this is my most basic recipe of black tourmaline and selenite. When we protect our spaces, when we envelop our whole home or room or whatever our quarters might be in these kinds of cleansing and protective energies, then the environment is doing most of the work for us. So we don't have to think too hard about the energies coming into our space, except for the ones we bring there. Of course, a grid like this isn't going to change that number one source of psychic harm, which is what's happening inside your own head, your own heart. But it certainly helps to clarify and prevent external energies from getting in. So thank you all. I hope you enjoyed energy cleansing with crystals, and I look forward to connecting with you in the future.